Hello friends, today's lecture is on Anton Chekhov, the great Russian writer. He wrote short stories, he wrote also novellas, and he wrote plays. And since our series is about the modern drama, which means the 20th century, so Chekhov comes very high in that particular list. And so far as the person is concerned, Professor Richa Bajaj will tell you in detail about the author as well as a text in her lecture. She teaches English in Hindu College, that is a college in Delhi University, Department of English, and she has analyzed a large number of plays and dramatic trends. Before I request her to begin her lecture, let me say from my side that Chekhov belonged to the late 19th century and the early 20th century, and he was a very effective writer. In fact, in India, he was quite popular during the national movement. And some people say that he also helped in shaping the short fiction in Hindi. That apart, Chekhov also was a person of few words. He would talk very little. He would also practice what is called the economy of words in his writing, and whatever he said was meant more than expressed from his side in the direct sense. So we have Chaucer, and he is time bound, but he is very relevant to us today. I say this, I raise it as a question to be posed to Professor Richa Bajaj, whether he is relevant, how much is his relevance, what are the issues, and some people call him a modernist, some people call him a pessimist, others call him a humanist. So there is a lot of discussion in criticism about modern drama in general and Russian drama in particular. So whether he is a modernist or not, whether he believes in some kind of stasis, some kind of lack of motion, and fixes himself on words only, on characters only, or whether he also has a sense of humor. Now the text that Professor Bajaj will cover would be The Cherry Orchard, and the title is very fine. It is very evocative, so something would be in order if the title is also discussed as a symbol, as a metaphor, as some kind of a trend-setting word, So all those things, and I now request Professor Bajaj to please give her comments as well as her lecture.
Thank you, Professor Anand Prakash. We'll look at first the life in Russia, and also look at Chekhov from the point of view of the late 19th century, I'd say. Chekhov was writing short stories and also drama, but then what makes him a kind of a peculiar, unique dramatist is something we will take up today. So, as we speak of Chekhov, I would say that he tries to project in plays life as it is lived. It's not a kind of, it's interesting that you say that, he's been viewed as a pessimist and modernist and humanist and sometimes also as a part of the larger Marxist, ideology. But I think the fact is that because he doesn't have an agenda in mind, he's not raising a kind of a propaganda, and because there is no thesis that he is trying to trash out and bring forth, therefore the playwright also remains open for interpretation, because his focus is on life as it is lived in that period. Therefore he's not concerned with attaching himself to some kind of dogma.
Is he period bound then? Shall we say that?
Yes, he's trying to understand and explore the period, explore the nuances of life as it is lived in the period, as people actually lived. So I think that he's very close to life and close to the real life. To that extent, he may be called a kind of a modern realist, I would say, a modern realist in theatre who's trying to bring theatre as close to life. And in that sense, he also, he fits well with probably Stanislavski and Ibsen also, because, they were also trying to look at drama as a kind of a realistic practice. Stanislavski would of course look at it, called himself proudly a naturalist, and but this is not the case with Chekhov. He is not going in this idea of naturalism or realism per se. What he is trying to do through his plays is to just evoke a mood, a period, a sense of the times. And I think when he produces or projects this on the stage, this sense of how things are, you see, characters in Chekhov suddenly become aware of their own situation and destiny in very specific moments. So life is lived commonly, but then there are these crucial moments when they become aware of their own destinies, when they become aware of their own situation and reflect on them.
So
I think he picks those up for projection.
He is more of an aesthete, more of an artist, more of a person who would not say things directly but would evoke.
He is definitely aesthetically projecting all these things, but I think he is a realist in the true sense, because he is trying to look at the various dimensions that remain perhaps hidden in life otherwise. So, there are hints thrown in his plays, and there are hints that take you and lead you to a particular point of view. It's very deeply historical, and which is why I would not call him, say, a decadent or an aesthete per se, because he is not writing for the purpose of aestheticism. His plays are deeply historical in nature, in the sense that they are trying to talk about, for instance, a kind of force in history that is unstoppable, almost like a juggernaut. So when he talks in this fashion, then there is a kind of style which is Chekhovian in that sense, where he is not going to preach through his plays, but he is going to offer the scene for direct perception by the reader or the audience. So he lets readers perceive on their own by building up a situation or a kind of theme which can be then interpreted by the reader. But this theme is very relevant to the times which produce it. So history and its forces as they impinge on the daily lives of individuals is what he focuses on. So he's not going into dramatizing a kind of a historical period. He's looking at the phenomena from the point of view of ordinary subjects and characters and people who just seem to be a part of a particular class or social group, and how they react and act in the situation. Their responses, they in a way become typical of that social group, and then it suddenly turns into a kind of a more historical phenomena and not really a story of a household. So his stories are seldom just domestic stories. They have a larger bearing, I would say, on the times and the history of the period. That's how I look at it.
Which means that Chekhov is having an eye on history, and that history is forming, or that history is already formed, that history is already complete before him, and he's just to make pictures of it. What is the case?
I'd like to alter the statement that it's just not just history. He's also trying to project a very important period in history, that is the transition. So he's very interested in, or maybe because he's situated in this period, because he's lived through the last decades of the 19th century, and at the turn of the century things are already changing. So he's capturing the transition, the historical transition that is taking place from the feudal order to a new kind of society that is coming up, where merchants and businessmen have suddenly come to the fore and are capturing land, grabbing land. They've become wealthy, moneyed sections, and the kind of old feudal order is crumbling in that sense.
So this historical change is reflected in his writing.
Right. So it is this transition from the old order to the new order, where the feudal order is crumbling and is on decline, and the new order is aggressively making its way in society. So it is this period of transition or change that he tries to capture through the characters and situations in his plays.
Is he taking a position on this transition?
That's the interesting part, because when you look at it, Chekhov is a sensitive writer, I think. So even when he'd have a larger notion about things, or his viewpoint maybe of one kind or another, his sympathies are for all characters in their own ways. Even the fool has his sympathy, even the fop has his sympathy, or the old class has his sympathy, and the new class, he sees it as a way forward. So there is a sense of nostalgia in his place for the old order, which doesn't really which is the part that is he a votary of the old order, and he sees this old order dying, but he's certainly looking at it in terms of tragic ways. It's a sad phenomena to see something die, but then he's able to see also the ascendancy of another class.
I appreciate the point you are making, but I'm slightly aware and also apprehensive about Chekhov being in the middle of all-time greats in Russian literature, and himself is also an all-time great. He has Dostoevsky on one side, Tolstoy in front of him, and Gorky just to follow him. And some people are propagandists in your opinion, as you put them. Gorky uses propaganda for his writing. Tolstoy is very historical. Dostoevsky is very psychological. And in this company, what kind of a figure he presents as a literary voice?
So I think he is a realist. I would say he's a realist because he tries to stay close to the nerves of the time, and he tries to capture it without necessarily imposing his own ideology on it. And even when he can see the progression of history, I think what he really shows is that the progression of history or any dynamic change has its own sorrows and pains and sufferings, and he tries to project these sufferings of people and look at them from various point of views. He's deeply skeptical about Russian society as such, as he sees, and also very impatient to change things. So in that sense, he finds that there is the old order seems to be anchored on this idea of slavery. Right, and therefore we need a new kind of order. So that strain is there in Chekhov, but he doesn't just dismiss this old class that has been. He's able to project the pain of this old class as well, and the people associated with it. So there are various dimensions, and I therefore would like to call him a realist before anything else. And that's how I would look at him. I would not like to, necessarily put him in any mold.
No, that's quite true. I agree with you, and that's a very useful point you are making. That he is a realist, but on his own terms, and that he will tell people why he is a realist, why he doesn't like a particular trend, and why he appreciates the presence of another trend that is forming itself.
Right.
So I agree with you on this.
So, and maybe some of the reminiscences of Chekhov might make sense, and this is in fact from Gorky. So I thought that this would probably give us an insight into what Chekhov was like as a writer, right? So Maxim Gorky, in his book Reminiscences of Tolstoy, Chekhov and Andreev, says, has observed the following about Chekhov, and he says, and I quote, "That was characteristic of him, to speak so earnestly, with such warmth and sincerity, and then suddenly to laugh at himself and his speech. In the sad and gentle smile, one felt the subtle skepticism of the man who knows the values of words and dreams, and there also flashed in the smile a lovable modesty and delicate sensitiveness."
That's a great compliment by Gorky.
By Maxim Gorky, who's just charting in this book his own conversations with Chekhov and what kind of person he was, how he came across to the world, and what was his viewpoint. So he was zealous in that sense in changing the order, and this kind of sincerity. It's very interesting. This is very typical of Chekhov. There is earnestness and sincerity, and then there would always be humor attached to it. So he'd suddenly change it. The sincerity would not become a serious subject or some kind of a profound statement. In fact, Chekhov is never very fond of profundity or complexity or philosophy. He would bring people down to the simplest possible manner. And in fact, Gorky in this book mentions how anybody who came to Chekhov automatically stripped oneself of all the ostentation and all the amplifications that one carried in speech, in manner, or in dress, and that Chekhov had this way of talking directly to the person and not be bothered about all the extravagances around this person's or the paraphernalia around this person. So I think that is something very typical of a Chekhov or manner, that or style, that there is sincerity and warmth, and then suddenly there is irony and humor, and that he would do to himself as well. But skepticism has been a part of his larger overview also, skepticism with respect to the present state of affairs in Russia and how he would respond to that. So Gorky in fact goes on to state his observations on life in Russian village, that is Chekhov's observation, and Chekhov is talking to Gorky here, and he says, and I quote, "Does it bore you to listen to my fantasies? I do love to talk of it. If you knew how badly the Russian village needs a nice, sensible, educated teacher. We ought to realize that without a wide education of the people, Russia will collapse like a house built of badly baked bricks. A teacher must be an artist in love with his calling." End quote.
You have actually mentioned through the quote of Gorky the point about language.
Right.
And badly baked brick. Please make a comment on this, the kind of language that he is using.
Right. Badly baked brick. So the foundation is,
yes.
if the foundation of society, according to him, and the teacher is the foundation of society, and he spends some time on talking about this, that, and Gorky always mentions in this book that he kept on discussing the teachers. He would tell me, oh, would you like to meet this teacher in the parish? Would this teacher needs this help, or there are some women teachers who need these books, would you help them out? So he was very particular about keeping the teacher at the center, because he said that they are the foundation and the light that that they are going to provide the kind of dimension and light to society, and therefore they must be sustained and they must not be suffering privations. So he was interested in this idea of the teacher, and I also feel that Chekhov in many ways in his plays and in his stories works like a teacher, because he's trying to teach through his through his drama, but not preach. Again, when I say teach, you feel that he wants to bring something before the audience, and when you see a play of Chekhov, you don't know what yet is he trying to get across, but the meaning somehow spins itself, and there is always a hidden context behind that meaning.
Can you
that comes
bring
to
out the
surface.
distinction between teaching and preaching? I think teaching is preaching, no?
No, I don't think so. I think because as Chekhov says, at one place, that the job of a dramatist is not to give answers but to raise questions. So I think a teacher who raises more questions than gives answers is a teacher, and one who finalizes or seals a point with answers is a preacher. I would like to look at it in that fashion. So I think he is also and he's doing exactly that through the plays. There are so many things that are left unsaid in his plays, so many questions that are just there staring in your face, and you don't know, the playwright is not answering them for you, but they stay with you, and you have to find your own meanings. So I think Chekhov is specifically doing that kind of practice through his plays, that is to bring to the fore questions that require brainstorming by Russian society. I think that is, and therefore, I mean, why would he call a teacher an artist? He says a teacher must be an artist in love with his calling. That's very true of himself, because he looks at himself as an artist. In fact, at one place, by profession he's into medicine, he's a physician, but he's all the time into he's an artist otherwise. So I think Chekhov is also talking about himself in that fashion, but not having the profession of a teacher. But yeah, that's how Chekhov looks at it. At another place, Chekhov describes Russia at the turn of the century in the following manner, and I quote, "Russia is a land of insatiable and lazy people. They eat enormously of nice things, drink, like to sleep in the daytime, and snore in their sleep. They marry in order to get their house looked after, and keep mistresses in order to be thought well of in society. Their psychology is that of a dog. When they are beaten, they whine shrilly and run into the kennels. When petted, they lie on their backs with their paws in the air and wag their tails. End quote. So this is
see
one
the word
way.
picture.
Right.
Yes,
So when he is talking about Russian life, and these are reminiscences again, Gorky is presenting them in the book. But look at how he is able to build this kind of an image of the dog and build the image of this kind of parasitic life that Russia is leading at that time. Or what he means by that is that he's also referring here to one, the nobility, but to also the class of clerks or the kind of educated group. He's very impatient with the educated groups. In fact, the lawyers and the teachers or the the philosophers. He thinks that they are really just they stop reading the moment they reach a point in their career, and they become careerists, and they're not bothered about facing the real questions of society. So he's very impatient with the educated lot at the time, as he is with the nobility. With the nobility, he still would have a soft corner, but he's very sharp when it comes to thinkers and philosophers and lawyers and doctors, because he thinks that they are the real scum and they are not performing the role that they must play in society. With the nobility, he calls them parasitic, but that's what they are according to him. And at another place, another quote from the text, the same reminiscence, here Chekhov says, a Russian is a strange creature. He is like a sieve, nothing remains in him. In his youth, he fills himself greedily with anything which he comes across, and after 30 years, nothing remains but a kind of grey rubbish. In order to live well and humanly, one must work with love and with faith. Unquote. So when you look at this kind of a perception, then you know that the man is clear in terms of what is required of the time. He was very conscious and I think very keenly aware of the requirement of Russia, and he saw this kind of decadence in life which he tried to portray. But so he's satirical also, but I think he's also very he thinks it as a task that the playwright must take up to project in his works this kind, what is required and where we are going wrong. So I think these are the 2 points that he takes up in his plays and tries to project them through life as it is ordinarily lived at the time.
So friends, Professor Bajaj has talked about this person, Chekhov, as a writer in general, and he is distinct in the sense, that he tells people, he presents before people word pictures, he compels them to think, and that he also creates significant silences. Professor Bajaj will talk more about it when she discusses the text. But then you raise a question, and then you keep silent, and then the people who are reading you, they start thinking about the questions themselves. And that kind of evocative nature of Anton Chekhov must have appealed a lot to the writers in the national movement. Yeah. So I think this point is well made, and we are quite clear about the aspects of a distinct literary thing that he is presenting. He is writing short stories, he is writing plays, he is also talking, and he is making people talk through his plays, and that's how perhaps a great writer communicates his meaning to the audience. So we look forward to the discussion of the text, one of the texts of Anton Chekhov later in this discussion. Thank you.